Hello, this is Kevin Kearns Always Pick Last, Chapter 3. Compared to the rest of the families in our largely second generation immigrant neighborhood, my parents were pretty average. Dad, John Kevin Kearns, was first generation Irish Catholic, as both his parents were fresh off the boat. Settling in Everett, Massachusetts, Mum Teresa Cassie was French Canadian, but born in Revere, Massachusetts. Mum loved telling us that she got married to Dad because he was the first guy she could actually tell off. They were only a year apart in age, and yet Mum worried about Dad from the first time she met him. I have to admit that I don't know the whole story behind my dad's health, but the family legend says that he wasn't supposed to live much past the age of 17. Something about him being born with half a liver. I know, it doesn't make any sense, but I don't know any more detail to the story than that. What I can say is that Mum worried about my dad's health for as long as I have memories. John, you're eating too much salt. John, lay off those cigars. They're not good for you. John, you don't have to eat all that meat. Think of your cholesterol. And on it went. Dad, on the other hand, didn't seem to worry about it much. He was an easygoing guy who loved people. Everywhere he went, he knew people by their first name, and they all greeted him by name. Some of my favourite memories were created during the summers when Dad would take me along for work. He was a building inspector for the city, and he took his job seriously. Most building inspectors strike the fear of God in people. Not my dad. Most people loved having my dad come by to inspect their building project. Hey Jackie, how's it going today? Great. Rudy, what am I looking at? Ah, yeah, I see. Looking good. So, what did you end up doing with those deficiencies I spotted last week? Got 'em handled, just like you asked. Hey, thanks for giving me a little extra time. I want to do this right. I know you do, Rudy. With that problem handled, we'd head on to the next site, and my dad would be greeted with the same kind of respect and friendship at every job site. Hey, Jackie, I'm not quite ready for you. What's going on? My dad would move forward, intent on helping rather than hindering. So many times there would be some kind of deficiency in the work, and my dad would always cut them some slack. He didn't overlook things, he just pointed things out, and then gave them a week or so to fix it before he'd come back. The people whose buildings he inspected knew he would be back, and they knew he'd be looking for signs that they had honoured their promise. I remember one time he went into a building and something wasn't right. He pulled the guy aside and said, "Look, I'm going to let you slide in this. Just this time. But when I come back next week, you gotta get this done right. If it's not done, I'm gonna have to pull the permit on you. Okay?" Okay, yeah. Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate it. Just trying to get it done. I understand, but we want to get this done right, don't we? Yeah, sure. Jackie, I'll have it done. I'll have it taken care of by next week. And it had always been taken care of. He'd inspect commercial sites. He'd inspect home additions in our neighbourhood. Everyone was either Irish, Italian, or Polish. One time, we went to a house not far from our immediate neighbourhood. Mario, a carpenter, was adding on a porch, and Dad was scheduled to inspect it. Hey, Mario! My dad greeted him as we walked around to the backyard to where Mr. Pernelli was working on a porch addition to their house. What you doing? Mario replied in his broken English, "Putting on a porch." Talking around his cannoli, wiping his hand on his jeans. There were 4 kids running around in the garden out back, yelling and hollering in the summer sun. We had a noisy neighborhood. Dad looked at what the guy was doing. Mario, what's going on here? This doesn't go here, and that doesn't go there. Come on. He turned and looked at Mr. Purnelly with a frown on his usually pleasant face, shaking his head. Mr. Purnelly gave in. Give me a break, Jackie. I gotta get it done, and I'm just doing the best I can. Dad looked at the kids playing in the yard, and we both heard Mrs. Purnelly inside scolding someone in Italian. He shook his head, and I knew he was going to let Mr. Purnelly have a little extra time. Okay, I'll give you a week. You have to figure this out. But Yam can't Mickey Mouse this together. You've got family to think about. You want one of your kids to fall off of here? They agreed on a time to meet the next week, and I knew that Mr. Purnelly would have all the problems fixed. Everyone wanted to please my dad, because they wanted their construction projects to keep moving forward. What I really admired was how Dad was able to give people bad news. Usually that their building techniques didn't quite meet code, and they never get mad at him. My dad commanded a lot of respect without having to throw his weight around. Man, I wanted to grow up just to be like him. When we left, I climbed back into our 77 Ford Maverick. Mum said that it was tan, but I thought it looked more peach than tan. It had no power steering and no air conditioning. We'd had another car that I had hoped would one day be mine, but my sister had recently totaled it. Now we had a freaking orange car that Dad laughingly said was 55 AC, meaning we had to go 55 miles an hour with the windows rolled down in order to cool off. I always rolled the windows down because my dad really loved his El Producto cigars, but I didn't. He never smoked while I was in the car, but the smell lingered from the times he would smoke in the car when he was all alone. It's a smell I always associate with my dad. Sometimes we stopped at Burham's ice cream store for some lunch. I always ordered the same thing, a raspberry lime Ricky. It's nothing more than soda water, raspberry soda pop, and lime juice. But at Burham's, they made it with crushed ice, like you had a slushy. It was delicious. They only knew my dad by his first name, Jackie. My mother was the only one who called Dad John. To everyone else, he was Jackie. Hey Jackie, coming in for lunch today? And a raspberry lime Ricky for young Kevin here, right? I nodded my head, grinning. Being greeted by the name and having the owner know my favorite drink was heavy stuff. Everyone loved my dad. He knew everyone by their first name, and they knew this. Dad was probably the friendliest guy I knew. The other thing I could never figure out was how much respect people gave my dad. He had power, certainly, but he never exerted it. He was just able to go up to someone, and in an instant there would be a friendly rapport between them. I watched it happen over and over, and I would run it through in my mind, but I could never figure out how I was able to do it. It was something I hoped to learn to do later in life, but during that time in my period in my life, I could only watch him and wish I had what he had. One summer evening, Tony and I were out later than usual, having managed to trick our respective mums into giving us permission to stay outside, even after the streetlights had come on. We sat in Webster schoolyard just outside the circle of glowing light from the street lamp, our backs against the chain-link fence, listening to the hypnotic sound of the chirping crickets. Being a warm night, they chirped at a very rapid rate, and the sound seemed so loud in the absence of anything else. We'd reach up from the time to time to pick one of the Mr. Italy's raspberries, and I puckered my mouth when I got one that wasn't quite as ripe as it should have been. This made the ripe ones taste that much sweeter. Some moments just feel perfect. And for just that moment, my life felt pretty good. A soft night breeze helped to cool us off from the heat radiating through our sneaker-shod feet from the black top of the schoolyard. Beside me, Tony fidgeting, first with his fingers, then migrated down to his feet that began tapping in a staccato rhythm, drowning out the soothing sound of the crickets. I let out a big sigh. I knew it was coming. He jumped to his feet and said, "Come on, let's do something before we have to go in." Tony always had to be the center of attention, and sitting in the dark shadows of the schoolyard wasn't feeding his need. He got up, started running toward Jefferson Avenue, shouting at me over his shoulder, "Come on, Kevin!" I obeyed, quickly catching up to him. With darkness covering our neighborhood, I felt pretty invisible. Lights glowed inside everyone's home, and I knew that no one would be looking outside. During the daytime, I wouldn't agree to getting into any mischief. It was just too hard to get away with it. The neighbors would tell mum or dad and then I'd be in for it then. The neighborhood was the neighborhood. Everyone watched out for everybody else, and they knew everybody's business. Under the cover of darkness, however, things were a little different. At first, I feared that Tony would leave the well-known streets of our neighborhood, but it seemed like he was just blowing off steam, turning around, running back through the schoolyard, and back to Dartmouth Street. Just then, the lights of a car heading down Jefferson Avenue caught Tony's attention. "Hey, Kevin, watch this!" Tony picked up a wad of paper and just chucked it at the car, heading down the street. But it didn't have enough weight to travel, much more than a few feet. With a grunt of disgust, Tony pounced on a rock about the size of a pack of chewing gum. He did a perfect baseball windup and then just let it go. We just stood there, frozen in that moment in time. I kept thinking, nah, there's no way he's going to hit it. No way. I hope. It landed with a loud crack on the windshield. "Oh shit," Tony shouted. "Run!" We both bolted and the car followed us. Hearing my heart beat in my ears, I followed Tony through a couple of backyards, hopping over darkened lamps that were tricycles or garden stools. It made sense at the time, but we'd forgotten that Jefferson was a one-way street, so when we doubled back, we figured we weren't going to get caught. I mindlessly followed Tony. He was the leader of this mission, not me. So when we burst through the bushes, right alongside the street, I expected the street to be empty. The driver exploded from his car, and I looked with horror at him. He was missing his right arm. My stomach clenched. How had Tony's rock managed to cut off this guy's arm? "What are you kids thinking?" He sounded pretty mad, his voice strong and vigorous. Too vigorous to have suffered such a serious injury. Tony didn't seem to have any qualms about what he had done. "Sorry, mister. This kid we were hanging out with, Mike, he's from New Hampshire. He threw that rock. We told him not to, but he threw it out anyway." Tony started telling the lie, and I started adding details just out of nowhere. I knew it was wrong. We'd cracked that windshield of a one-armed man, and I was lying to get out of it. The guy hollered at us for a few minutes, but eventually he got in his car and drove away down Jefferson Street. I looked at Tony and muttered, "I gotta go in now." I ran home, up the stairs, and into the house, and made no fuss about going to bed. I huddled there in the darkness, thinking about how black my soul must look. I don't know why I'd just gone along with Tony. When the rock he'd thrown cracked against the windshield of the one-armed man's car, I felt as though I'd crossed the line, and I didn't know how I felt. The next Saturday afternoon, I was working on one of my airplane models. Dad came over to where I was carefully cutting apart the pieces of my F4 U4 Corsair fighter model airplane. He placed his cup of coffee down on the table and pulled up a chair. "What can I do to help?" he asked. I passed over the fuselage where the retractable landing gear had to be attached. I managed to put together a few model airplane kits that were pretty straightforward, but this kit had gear, bay doors that opened and closed, folding wings, armament drop tanks, bombs, and rockets, and a rotating prop. As Dad had taught me, I had removed all the parts from the box and spread them out, checking them against the instruction sheet to make sure I had all the parts I needed. While Dad read the instructions for the retractable gear, I got two toothpicks from the kitchen so I could use them to hold the wheels while I painted them. They had to be painted and dried before they could be put on the airplane. We worked in silent companionship for a while, passing the X-Acto knife back and forth, sharp point away from us. As we needed to remove the plastic spurs that stick on some of the airplane parts, each joint had to be perfectly smooth before any glue was applied. Dad had taught me this just to use just enough glue to keep the parts together. Some of my first models had excess blobs of glue that spoiled the model's appearance. Other places, the glue had actually melted the join area because I'd used too much. Today, I deftly applied the thinnest lines of glue before holding the model pieces together. Dad watched me as he sipped his coffee, nodding his approval. Once everything was glued together, it was time to wait for it to be completely cemented before moving on. Another lesson I'd had to learn the hard way. As we both sat admiring our handiwork, Dad cleared his throat. Uh-oh, I knew there was something coming. You were out pretty late last night. Just an observation, but coming from my dad, it was more than just an observation. Yeah. My brain raced to see how I could spin the story. Heard about some boys chucking rocks at cars. Again, a statement only. No accusation, but as he took a sip of his coffee, his eyes met mine, and I couldn't break the stare. Trapped. I said nothing. Dad's right elbow arched as he tilted his head to the side. You know anything about that? My mind raced for the right thing to say. Finally, I blurted out, Tony threw the rock. As Dad nodded his head thoughtfully, I realized I needed to come clean. I was with him, but I didn't throw anything. Honest. You know, don't you, that you have to be careful who you hang out with? My head nodded furiously. Yeah, I do. Tony sometimes lets his impulses get the better of him. I think you're more careful than that. Next time, come inside on time. Nothing ever happens at night. Again, I nodded, my eyes still caught by his penetrating stare. Okay then. I'm thinking of going Chelsea Theatre to see Charlton Heston in Midway. You interested in coming? Really? I wasn't going to die today? Sure. Get ready then. We need to leave in 10 minutes. And with that, Dad ended one of the most uncomfortable conversations I'd ever had with him. I told the truth. And that's what mattered to him. He'd believe me when I said that I hadn't thrown any rocks. As tempted as I had been to lie about being with Tony, I was so relieved that I made the right choice. That afternoon with my dad was even better than our usual Saturday afternoons watching Creature Double Feature, where we would argue over the various attributes of Godzilla versus King Kong. Sitting next to Dad in the theatre, munching on buttered popcorn and drinking a soda, I figured I was the luckiest kid in the world because I had the greatest dad ever. And that concludes chapter 3 of Always Pick Last by Kevin Kearns.